Welcome to the deep dive. We've got some interesting source material here today, all related to a specific case. It involves a smart knee implant.
That's right. And we're really going to dive into the heart of it, which, according to these documents, is all about patient consent.
Exactly. Our mission is to unpack what these sources tell us about this particular device, what it could mean for you if something like this happened without your consent, and, well, some pretty surprising risks the documents allege weren't disclosed.
Okay, so the story, based on the sources, revolves around a patient, Mr. Steve Rusak. He claims he received a Zimmer Persona IQ Smart Knee. It has this component called a canary tribal extension, or CTE.
Right.
This happened during a total knee replacement surgery. The sources say March 11, 2025.
And his core claim.
His core claim, as laid out in these documents, is that this implant, the CTE part, was put in completely without his knowledge, or, crucially, his consent beforehand.
So, medical battery. Violation of informed consent. That's what the sources suggest are the allegations.
Pretty much. You go in thinking you're getting a standard knee replacement.
And allegedly, you come out with this extra advanced hardware you never agreed to.
And what's really interesting looking at these sources is how explicit the consent requirements seem to be for this specific device.
Oh.
Yeah, the documents reference the manufacturer's own websites, Zimmer Biomet, Canary Medical, plus FDA, and high-pay documentation. They all apparently state that explicit prior informed consent is, well, mandatory.
Mandatory, not just recommended.
Right. And the sources even point out the practical steps. Like, for a patient to even use the smart features, setting up an account, a home base station, that stuff is described as happening before the surgery.
Which, yeah, that strongly implies there has to be a pre-op discussion, doesn't it? You have to agree before it even gets implanted.
Exactly. The sources suggest the company's own processes kind of bake in that pre-surgical consent.
Okay, so let's talk about the device itself. What is it, according to these sources? And what about these alleged dangers? This is where it gets quite eye-opening for you listening.
Well, the documents pull out a really key quote. A limitation stated in the FDA documentation for the device.
What does it say?
It says, the outputted kinematic data from the device are not intended to be utilized for clinical decision-making and have not been evaluated for such a purpose.
Okay, wait, so the data it collects,
Yeah.
it's not meant to help the doctor decide your treatment right then and there.
That's how the sources interpret this FDA statement. It suggests the main value is an immediate clinical application for you.
So what is the value then, according to the sources?
It shifts, the sources argue, towards broader data aggregation. You know, improving efficiency maybe, research, developing future devices, things like that.
So it's got this dual purpose. It's partly a medical implant to help you move.
But it's also functioning pretty significantly, according to these sources, as a data harvesting tool.
And the sources claim this turned the patient into an unwilling data subject.
Yeah, and that their personal health data becomes a valuable commodity. The sources definitely raise ethical flags here about, commercial interests potentially clashing with patient autonomy.
Okay, beyond the data side, what about physical risks? The sources mention specific dangers tied to the battery inside, right? A lithium-ion battery.
Yes, outlined in the FDA documentation that the sources reference, there's an external defibrillator risk.
Meaning if you need defibrillation.
It could potentially damage the device, cause it to fail, maybe even rupture or overheat. Burns, tissue damage from leakage. It's listed as a possibility.
Go well.
Thermal runaway, that's a rapid, dangerous temperature spike. And corrosion and leakage, which again could irritate tissue, cause burns, inflammation.
Serious stuff.
But there's one risk the sources really emphasize as alarming. It's called the battery cremation risk.
Battery cremation risk. What does that mean?
It means, according to the warning reference in the sources, that if the battery isn't removed before cremation, there's a risk of explosion, damage to the crematory facility, potential injury to the staff.
Wait, hold on. So the sources are saying this implant carries a risk that impacts things after someone has died.
That's exactly what the sources highlight. They frame it as this really unique potential violation. It affects dignity, autonomy, but extends beyond your own lifetime.
Wow.
It implies this potential burden, this post-mortem obligation falling onto the family. And the sources argue that denying someone the chance to consent to that, something dictating what happens to their remains, it adds this whole other layer to the alleged violation, a profound failure in disclosure.
Bringing it back to Mr. Rusak, the patient in these sources, how did he react when he found out, according to the documents?
The sources describe profound shock, Emotional distress, they present this reaction as direct evidence of the non-economic harm caused, underscoring how serious the alleged violation felt to him.
So wrapping this up based on the sources we've looked at for you, what we have is a case alleging a patient got a smart medical device, one that collects significant data, not primarily for their clinical benefit,
Okay.
and carries specific risks, including some really unusual ones like post-mortem considerations.
All allegedly without any prior informed consent.
It really hammers home how vital truly informed consent is, especially now as technology keeps adding these unexpected dimensions, data privacy, post-mortem requirements to medical implants.
Yeah, it definitely leaves you with a thought, building on what these sources suggest.
Yeah.
As our medical tech gets smarter, more connected, collecting all sorts of data, having complex parts, what new kinds of disclosure, what new forms of consent are going to be ethically required, legally required, to really respect patient autonomy, not just during treatment, but maybe for their whole life, and potentially even after.